everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Deepika, and I'll be your host. And today we have Misha Nonoo here to discuss sustainability and the future of fashion. For folks who are wondering why, in the middle of a global pandemic, are we chatting about fashion, a few quick stats. Every year, 80 billion pieces of new clothing are purchased globally, and from 2000 to 2014 alone, the global fashion industry has expanded 60%. According to the United Nations, the fashion industry contributes to more climate change than all international flights and maritime shipping combined, generating 20% of water waste and 10% carbon emissions globally. As the world marches towards 2030 climate and sustainability goals, what is required is a new fashion philosophy. So how do we create this philosophy to revolve around the SDGs? What does sustainability in fashion look like? These questions and more will occupy the gravitational center of today's discussion with Misha Nonoo, who has been creating chic, long-lasting, timeless fashion in sustainable ways for many years now. Named one of Forbes 30 Under 30, Misha Nonoo is a New York-based women's fashion designer who was the first to pioneer on-demand manufacturing in a move to dramatically reduce environmental impact of her fashion line. Her live on-demand model sees each garment cut and sewn in response to every individual order, thereby reducing inventory waste by 90%. And while you have joined us, Misha, I'm going to jump straight right in. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be hosting, and we can't wait to hear more how you're pulling this off.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
You're dialing in from New York or California?
I'm dialing in from California today. I'm going to be in New York soon enough, but we've been in California for the past couple of weeks, which has been lovely.
That's awesome. Misha, I've been following your work for quite a few years now, but for our listeners who are not very familiar with your background, can you tell us about your personal journey that led you to doing what you're doing today?
Yes, of course. So I started a fashion label in the more traditional sense back in about 2010, so about 10 years ago now. And I sold to high-end department stores like Bergdorf Goodman, Neiman Marcus. And after 5 years of doing that, I realized actually that the future of fashion did not lie in the hands of major retailers. And I would see that even if you had a great selling season with a major retailer, you would have maybe 75% sell-through, and there would be about 25% left over. And it didn't really make sense to me that that 25% would go to, an off-price retailer, or it would go to landfill, and that was seen as being a good thing. That was a really strong season. Like, wow, well done. And I was like, well, what about this 25% that no one's talking about that really adds up? I mean, we're a boutique brand, but for other businesses, that's a huge amount of inventory. So in 2016, I relaunched my business as a direct-to-consumer brand. I really scaled back the collection. I went from doing 4 collections a year to doing piece-by-piece delivery pretty much every month. So much fewer items, and every single piece went back to each other. So the foundation of the collection is always about wardrobe building. You have about 8 essential items, and every single thing that we introduce can go back and be worn to it. And we show how versatile each piece is. For example, a jacket can be worn as a dress, can also be worn, with a turtleneck underneath it and leggings. So we show you like how you style everything so it can be worn together. So I wanted to relaunch the business in a much more sustainable way, and that was in 2016. And then by 2017, we launched on-demand manufacturing for the business across the entire collection. So that means that for every item that is ordered, so for example, if you go onto mishanonoo.com today and place an order, that piece will be cut, sewn, and shipped and received to you within 7 to 10 business days. So we don't hold inventory. We have a fabric liability, and we have every pattern marked and graded from size XXS to XXL. And other than that, we have absolutely no finished stock. So we just realized that in my mind, for us to be able to be a business of the future and not only relevant, but to be as values driven as I wanted it to be, we had to be really responsible with how we were contributing to the global fashion industry.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And talking about the theme of this conversation, sustainability as a word, I feel like it's pretty broad and it's kind of overused today with varying different definitions. Like to me as a consumer, I think of like being conscious when buying a product, and which is not just good for me, but good for the planet. I would love to hear what sustainability means to you, and in particular, like sustainable fashion. How do you see that?
So I think that's a great point. I think that being conscious as a consumer, being mindful consumption is a big part of sustainability. And the mindfulness movement has now been around for a good, let's say, decade. And I think that is slowly infiltrating into the fashion industry. But put very simply, it's ecological integrity and social justice when it comes to the fashion industry. So it's thinking about what comprises your clothing, who is making your clothing, how it is shipped and delivered to you. Is there a lot of plastic in the packaging? All of those very, very important themes that are ways that you can really think about your impact and the businesses that you spend money on and that you buy clothing from or buy accessories or whatever it is that you're shopping with. So sustainability in fashion is all about, the ecological integrity, social justice. But I also think that sustainability, when you think about your wardrobe, is about the way that you wear things. For example, our tagline, our slogan is buy better, wear longer. So for example, pieces that we introduce, if they can't be worn in 3 different ways, then I won't introduce them into the collection. So there's kind of a bit of a filter with when we're designing product and when we're adding it to the collection. Is this piece something that you can wear in 3 different ways? And when I say that, I mean, if it's a dress, can you wear it with a shirt underneath it? Can you wear it with a t-shirt? Can you wear it with a turtleneck? Can you wear it with tights? Can you wear it with sneakers? Can you wear it with high heels? All these different things that mean that piece is very versatile and, in my mind, can live and last in your wardrobe for a long time. So there's an element of sustainability in that sense. And I think that it's really critical that when people are buying things, they also think about how they're laundering. So, dry cleaning is not particularly good for the environment. And it's something that is what a lot of people in major cities do. They have a white shirt, for example, like this, which is one of our best-selling items. That white shirt, people are like, oh, well, it's a white shirt, I'm going to send it out to the dry cleaner. But actually, we show you and we teach you, and we actually sell complementary products on the website that you can use to launder your product to get the most out of it and to launder it at home, whether that's in a washing machine or by hand, so that you don't have to always be dry cleaning products. So there's a lot of different facets to sustainability in my mind. It's how it's made, it's the ecological impact, it's how it's worn, how many times can it be worn, how long it's lasting in terms of how you launder it. All of those things have great impact.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of sustainability, and without acknowledging the crisis around us, I feel like our conversation is going to be incomplete. So curious to hear how COVID-19 has shaped this definition and your work in particular.
So I think that COVID-19 has, with many industries, accelerated what was already happening. So I think that, you were starting to see how major retailers, department stores around the world were suffering because people didn't necessarily want to buy a coat in August. They didn't want to think about, buying a bikini in December or January. They wanted to actually shop for things when they were available, but there was these weird guidelines that were in place a lot of the time from the fashion houses because they had to produce so far in advance because they were producing bulk stock and inventory, because you're also getting a discount when you're producing so many pieces at once. So what we did with On Demand is we slowed that whole cycle down. And we designed things on about a 3-month rolling calendar. So every 3 months, we're thinking about new introductions. Those pieces are then sampled, but we don't buy inventory in those pieces. So, we have a fabric liability, but we also have core fabrics that we're always designing into. And for example, we've just this week, we're launching a new sustainable fabric that's made out of bamboo, which is a really beautiful crepe fabric. So it's thinking all the time ahead of how you are introducing items and not having to buy at mass in how you're producing. So I think that really changes things. But ultimately, COVID-19 has shifted, I think, consumption also because we're all working from home. We aren't gathering and socializing in the same way. I think we're all becoming a lot more conscious of the things that we really enjoy and want to do in our lives, and what we really want to reintroduce into our lives when all of this is over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and tying to one of the shifts that we're seeing thanks to COVID-19 is the shift to digital first models for businesses. And having followed your work for quite a few years, Misha, I have seen that you've made some bold moves early on in the fashion industry, way ahead of others. Like back in 2015, you ditched the New York Fashion Week to do a digital, an Insta live show instead of the traditional runway shows. And then following years, you created the Snapchat lookbook, and in the years to come, more social media first fashion. And I feel like now many businesses are having to adopt these practices. What's some of your like best practices that have helped shape your brand, and it's your advice to other brands around the world who are now having to cope with it for the first time?
You know, I think, first of all, thank you so much for listing all of that. I think ultimately, I have always been someone who's kind of been a bit of a futurist and looked into the future and thought, how can we do things differently, but still appropriately? And, you know, now, because of COVID-19, all of these fashion brands that would normally be showing during New York Fashion Week are instead you know, showing on Instagram. And that was something that we did 5 years ago. I think that when I left doing a runway show, it was because ultimately I realized that that idea of a collection that was seasonal and shown on a runway to buyers was completely outdated and a bit tone deaf. Ultimately, it's consumer first. And a lot of the choices that I've made have always been about the consumer first. And to something that you and I were discussing prior to this conversation, I think that people need to be able to rely on businesses to give them the right choices, to give them the best choices. And that's something that I've always wanted to do for our consumer and for other consumers, is we do the work so that you can make the best choice, whether that's in, you know, how you are dressing, or, you know, what you're putting into your wardrobe, or any recommendations that we make, whatever it is. It's like we've done all the hard work for you so that you can know that you're wearing something that's fully made out of bamboo and that will decompose easily. You know that this is a brand that doesn't hold inventory. You know this is a brand that has eliminated all plastic from their packaging, which is no mean feat. You know that we've done the hard work so that we can present the best option for you. And I think the digital first was just was an extension of that. We knew that we had customers all around the US and actually all around the globe. My background is that I came from, you know, I grew up in the Middle East, and then I lived in London and then Paris, and then I moved to the United States. And I knew that we had a woman, if we had a woman in one place, if we had a customer in one place, we had that same customer elsewhere in the world, because it's not really about demographics, it's very much about psychographics. And I think that this customer that's invested in, pieces that are going to stand the test of time, that look chic and classic, but are also doing as little environmental harm as possible. To me, that woman was someone who would be we would be able to find her easily on the internet. So, you know, we do have a store in New York City, but, you know, having actual brick and mortar stores was never something that was a part of the big plan. And I think that now everybody's seeing how easy it is to speak to a customer online. I mean, it's you know, for example, doing things like this, like, you know, where you're in India, I'm in California, we're able to have a very meaningful conversation, and it's all digitally enabled. And I think, God, how lucky are we? And if we have these tools at our disposal, why don't we use them?
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who has pioneered digital first fashion, I'm curious to hear what you think about the Great Reset. I mentioned this, but the World Economic Forum is talking about economies and calling upon industries to collectively think about building a more resilient and sustainable future in the name of recovery post-COVID. So what is that Great Reset for fashion looking like? Is that going to give birth to good fashion? What are some of your thoughts?
I really hope so, to be honest with you. I genuinely hope so. We've been doing this, you know, we've been digital first for 4 years. We've been creating product on demand for 3 years. We eliminated all plastic from our packaging last year. Now we're eliminating plastics from fabrics this year. Every year we're iterating and we are doing our best to get better. And we know that we are by no means perfect. And it's these slow innovations and iterations that help us to get better and better and better. And in my mind, my hope, honestly, is that other brands can jump on the bandwagon. And I think that, you're seeing some of the old guard behind. And I think that ultimately with more of those brands that kind of go out of business and with more of those old ways of doing things going out of business, it's going to allow for us to all see a real shift and for newness to take the stage. And it has to be new mindsets that take over, people that aren't afraid of trying things and failing. I mean, when we did On Demand back in 2017, that could have gone horribly wrong. And not only that, as we've scaled, there are so many ways that we could have, fallen down, and it has not been easy. But I think that in order for change to happen, people have to really take on the challenge head first. And I hate to say it, but I think that ultimately there's going to be a lot of people who go out of business in order to allow for room for newness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And absolutely. And speaking of the problem of waste and some of these futuristic ideas, how do we solve some of the problems that we're facing today in the fashion industry, and waste being one of them? When I say waste, we're talking about in your business, you have been able to cut it down by 90% by not holding inventory and plastic-free packaging. But how do you see this being solved at scale, Misha? Like, I feel like that's still a burning challenge. What are some of your thoughts?
So I think that when you talk about at scale, you're talking about the huge retailers who have, stores everywhere on the high street, for example. I think that that's kind of more the mass mentality. I think that seasonality is a huge problem. I think that the more that we think genuinely about seasonality, it kind of contributes to this problem. Yes, of course, there are cold days, there's winter, there's places where people get very, very cold. But if you're living in somewhere that's like a ski resort or something like that, you have your jacket that you probably wear every single winter, and you layer. And that is kind of the way that I see clothing and fashion in general now, is about layers. So I don't see it as being seasonal. I see it as being foundational items that you layer on top of one another. So I think that seasonality is something that we have to totally rethink, like trends, seasonality. You go into a high street, I don't want to, name names. We know who they are. You go into a major high street retailer, and this week they've got all these different colors and all these different fabrics, whatever. And next week you're going to go in and it's a whole other host of things. And they need newness because they have to attract a customer that comes back week after week that's looking for something new. So I think that seasonality has to go. And then I think that actually for people who are working with scale, you're going to go rather from on demand to just-in-time manufacturing. And we're actually working on a back-end software right now to deal with machine learning that is going to help with order projection around on demand, for example, because we project orders manually at this moment. But the more information that you can feed the machine, the more that we're going to be able to predict what happens and what things are happening week by week. So instead of it being day by day, you start to move to week by week. And I think that major retailers could 100% work on a week by week basis, especially if they have all of the inputs. And with the scale that retailers like that have, it wouldn't even take that long for them to have enough information to see how fast or how slow they have to produce core units and core styles. And I don't really believe that these trendy pieces need to exist in the same way. Certainly not, from retailers that are, you're buying something that's a trendy piece that you're going to wear 3 times for $16. Think about the labor that's gone into that. Think about how much that person has been paid. Think about the shipping. Think about the fabric. Think about what the contents of that fabric are. I mean, everything that is made really well costs something. There is a cost because there's a human cost. There is a textile cost. there's a dye cost, there's all of these things that to do it well and appropriately cost a certain amount. So if something is $15, $16 less, you have to really think about who is making it, at the very minimum, who's making it and how much are they being paid to make this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the social justice aspect is really important in my mind.
Absolutely. And I feel like that growing awareness is causing for some consumers, at least on the education side, be aware before they make that kind of choice. And recently, circular economy as a concept has gained popularity. How effective do you see that being a solution in solving for waste?
I think a circular economy would be phenomenal. I think that we have to solve for certain issues still. I think that there has to be a quality aspect to a circular economy. I think that something has to be able to be worn many, many times before you're able to then return it. If it's something that's like a t-shirt that you're spending, $8 to $12 on from a high street retailer, and you then after 4 wears, you can return it and get a new one. I think you, again, have to think about the issue of that. I think that, some people will use the excuse that they don't make enough money in order to be able to invest in clothes that are a bit more expensive, say $40 for a t-shirt instead. People would say that's wildly expensive. But I think that you have to think about how many times you can wear that $40 t-shirt versus how many times you can wear that $8 t-shirt before it being discolored, before it pilling, before any of these things, because of all the things that we talked about, fabric quality and who's sewn the garment, all of that kind of stuff. So I think that we have to change the mindset of people before a circular economy is really going to work. Because as beautiful as the concept seems, people have to wrap their head around spending a little bit more on the base item before it will really work in essence.
Gotcha. So in a post-COVID world, do you see consumers driving this mass movement to sustainable fashion, or is it going to be more brands like yourself doing more and more and then giving consumers more and better choices?
I think it's going to be both, to be honest. I think that it's going to be a great mix. I think that businesses need to provide better options for customers. I think that the more options there are, the better, honestly, because people will become more and more mindful and more aware of the actual cost, the ecological cost, the social cost, all of these aspects of where your clothing is really coming from. And they'll ask the questions themselves. So I think that once businesses start to put options out there in front of people, people will then start to ask the question, because they'll be aware of the fact that things that they weren't necessarily aware of before are really critical and important to the clothes that they're wearing on their back. And people always say, oh, fashion, it's frivolous, it's not important, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe they're thinking about, a ball gown that somebody might wear 3 times in their life. But I always say, fashion, even though you might not think of it this way, getting dressed and, waking up and drinking water and eating, they're the only things that we have to do every single day. So every single person engages with fashion, even if you don't think that the clothing that you wear is fashion. That is the umbrella term that it's under. So it's a responsibility that we all share, and it will be so impactful once people become more and more aware of their impact, men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think some of these behaviors, habits are here to stay. And something about fashion industry that particularly stands out is for the last 20 years, we haven't seen any shift. Like in our habits, smartphone has brought in this change where we're now accustomed to this device, which we didn't have access to less than a decade back, at least for some of us here in India. But if you think of the smartphone industry, we went from, in just a few decades, we went from telephone to wireless, handheld, and then smartphone revolution driven by iPhone and the Androids of the world, but haven't seen any kind of like movement, something so drastic for fashion. Is it an outlier, or is that iPhone, Android moment coming for fashion?
I think that you're going to see it in the next 5 to 10 years. I genuinely do. I believe that you're going to see robotics in manufacturing. I think that 3D printing is going to become something that we're going to see more and more. I think that people will be able to shop with their own avatar. I think that will happen in the next 5 years. I mean, someone was just showing me something yesterday where there's a company that can actually Photoshop any item of clothing onto a photograph of you so that you could see what you look like in something before you buy the product. The next iteration of that is your walking, moving avatar that's online that you can dress in things. Machine learning, as we were talking about with software that we're developing ourselves, like machine learning is already something that is going to become critical in the back end of things, even in the way that we look at how we solve for products that we show to customers. Maybe you have a habit of buying white shirts from us, and maybe we'll be like, okay, well, actually, because we don't have to produce a product, maybe we start to design products specifically for you because you're a great customer of ours, you're a loyal customer of ours. I think that within the next 5 to 10 years, it's not going to be tomorrow, but I genuinely believe that technology is going to touch the fashion industry in a much deeper, much more impactful way than it has thus far. And I think it's because you're going to start to see people rise through the ranks that have grown up with technology. And I think the problem is right now is that a lot of the people that are at heads of brands, fashion companies, publications, they have not grown up with technology in the way that we have.
Yeah, that's such an interesting insight. And I recently read Google is also doing this pilot of tracking some of the sustainable raw materials. And then I see my friends in the biotech world coming up with new materials, because materials is also an important conversation to have. If you look at some of the stats, like 60% of all textiles are made of polyester and non-renewable petroleum-driven fibers. And that brings us to the conversation of microplastic, which is a relatively newer problem we're having to have in when talking about sustainable fashion. So, excuse me. So what are some of your thoughts on, I'm just so excited to talk to you. What are some of your thoughts on the biotech side of things, where people are building genetically engineered materials, lab-grown silk, and
leather? Yeah, I personally think it's extraordinary. I think that it'll be adopted. I think people might think it's a little bit strange right now that your leather's been grown out of mushroom, but look at how quickly people in the food space have adopted Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meat. I think that all it really takes is for a group of early adopters to start to believe in something and use it, and then 5 years later, it becomes part of mainstream. I don't think it's strange at all to think about, a handbag that is made of lab-grown leather. I think that that's extraordinary. I think it's wonderful to think of wearing a silk blouse that is made from lab-grown silk. I think that it's the fact that we'll be able to control that manufacturing, to know that we're not harming animals in any way. I mean, with silk, there are still ways and means that people don't know about that for some silk growers, not all at all, but that is not ethical. Sometimes they actually burn the silkworms, and people may say, well, who cares? Do silkworms have feelings? Or but I think a lot of people actually, if they were to see the process or to watch a video, would be pretty upset by it. I think it's just a lack of awareness, as we've been talking about. It's the common thread, really, is that people don't really ask the question because they don't know. So the more that we as businesses educate the customer in terms of, these are your two options. Would you like it where, the silkworm has been harmed, or a cow has been killed for this leather? Or would you like it lab grown and it's made out of mushrooms and it's just as soft and it has no smell and, et cetera, et cetera. And I think people, if there is no difference in the finished product, will be very happy to go with the genetically engineered version of something. That's my instinct.
Gotcha. And as a vegan fellow biotech enthusiast, I feel like that's such great news. Yeah. Do you see any kind of initial response coming from consumers? Have you started to play around with it, or is that on the cards?
Actually, to tell you, some of our most avid customers who are real sustainability pioneers, and they know, just as much as we do, they write in and they ask us questions like, are you thinking about using this? Have you heard about this? They actually are driving the conversation with us behind the scenes. So it's something that I'm very, very proud of, is that, probably about 25% of our customer base are as informed as we are. And that's extraordinary. It means that they're coming to us for that purpose and that reason. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm really proud that we're building a community around that.
That's fantastic. And shifting gears a little, I read this somewhere that 46% biological footprint in fashion is due to producing elsewhere and then transporting it. How is your eponymous brand handling supply chain?
So I think the future 100% is about near sourcing. I think that near sourcing is something that if, as you said, gears can be shifted, people would be very, very happy to buy things that are more local. I kind of see the fashion industry a little bit like the food movement 10 to 20 years ago. You know, now we love the concept of farm to table. We love the concept of going to a farmer's market or buying local or anything like that. And it's very much a part of mainstream consumption when it comes to food. So I actually think that near sourcing is really the future of manufacturing. We have plants in Shenzhen in China, in Hong Kong, and we also have just opened Peru, which is making all of our Pima cotton, which is a switch that we just made. So all of our t-shirt sweats, all Pima cotton out of Peru. We batch ship in order to try to mitigate how far each item is being shipped and the shipping cost to that. But recently we were talking to a local factory in the United States about whether we would be able to work with them to do some of our local US production there. And then our hope would be, you know, in next year or the year after to think about opening something potentially in Portugal so that we have plants all around based on A, their expertise, B, where our customer is buying things. So the logistical aspect is complicated to say the least, but it's absolutely, to your point, part of the future and it's a part of the solution for the future.
And how do you see this getting scaled by other manufacturers? Because when we have to think of solving for fashion industry, there has to be like that mass shift in like from fast fashion to even like these suppliers giving us better options. But having to do this is no easy feat. Like, you know it yourself. How do you see that getting scaled like more locally so supply for masses?
I would love to say that fast fashion will go away. I mean, it would be such a dream to say that, you know, fast fashion, which is a huge contributing part of this, of the problem, would go away completely. I don't think that will be the case. It'll never go away completely. But the people who are causing a great deal of burden, how will they solve for that? I mean, it would be, again, near sourcing. It would be finding local plants and splitting up orders. And if they went on just-in-time manufacturing, it was week by week, and they weren't producing 36,000 white T-shirts every month. Instead, they were, they broke that down. And they were producing a quarter of that, and they were doing it week by week. Why wouldn't you be able to produce a little bit more locally in a smaller factory? So it's like almost thinking about how you downsize each thing and you do things incrementally as opposed to a huge lump sum order in one factory in one place.
Gotcha. So I know we have a lot of audience questions waiting, but lastly, it's very inspiring, Misha, to see how you've like over the years fearlessly reinvented your business and then so successfully aligned your mission and values to the work you do. So what's your advice for future sustainability first entrepreneurs, not just in fashion, but outside, who are just getting started?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. I would say you have to lead with your heart, 100%. We are a values-driven business. It's so important to us. You know, our pillars are sustainability and female empowerment. And those things are what drive us day in, day out. And I would say that for anybody who's felt that the playing field has been so crowded for such a long time, I think that there's going to be a leveling. I think that now is actually the time. And I think that if you have a good idea, now is the time for you to think about how you bring it to market. And, you know, maybe you start in a small way. Not everything has to be big. I think that the problem has been that people have thought, well, who's the next Ralph Lauren? Who's the next Tory Burch? Who's the next Zara? But actually, I think that maybe the future is going to be a lot of smaller brands, more boutique brands that have a niche audience, and people go to them because they feel as though there's something very special about the product that they're getting. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that could be a really good thing for sustainability and for whatever values are really at the heart and soul of your brand.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna quickly search for how we get to some audience questions. All right, we have one from Rachel Blank coming up. I would love to know what you think is one piece we should all have to feel our most fabulous selves working from home.
Well, hello, Rachel. That is a great question. I think that if you can only have one piece when you're working from home, most of the time it's about, if you're doing any Zoom calls or anything like that, looking put together on the top. So I always think that it's a great button down. We have several that we sell day in, day out. One is the husband shirt, the other is the 9 to 9, the other is the Ada top. And I think that that great button down is the piece that, you always look put together. You can button it all the way up. You can keep it a little bit open. And aside from that, if you've got great button downs already, I think that a really comfortable pair of trousers. So we have a pair of pants called the Murray, which I live in. They've got a thick elasticated waistband, and they come as a sweat, and they also come in linen, depending on your climate. But I think that just having a great pair of pants that you can throw on with a lot of different tops is really important, and you feel put together. I think that it's really critical when you're working from home that you still get up in the morning and you get dressed as though you're going to work. And then, when it gets to be end of the work day, then you can get undressed and put your sweats on or your cashmere sweater or whatever it is to get all cozy. But I think that delineation of, kind of work day and being back at home, even if you are at home all day, is really important.
Thank you. We have Tracy Young, who asks, as COVID has impacted the globally dependent supply chains in fashion, have you thought about bringing manufacturing more local distributed? How might this work with being on demand?
Gracie, that's a great question. And to the point that I was saying earlier, we have thought about it. And actually, there was a very major fashion business in the US that had a shirting plant in the United States, and a shirting is a core item in our business. We are speaking with them actually about whether we would be able to use a part of the plant to produce our US shirting business. So it's something we think about all the time. We're looking into Portugal to do our European shirting business because they have great shirting and they know how to work the garment really well. So it's something that we're looking at all of the time. And it's because we're on demand, it actually works really well for us. We just have to have a factory partner that signs on to think about, yes, we'll say to you, we are happy to produce X number of garments per month, but we're not producing all of that upfront. We're producing them piece by piece because we don't know exactly which sizes are going to be ordered upfront. So it's a shift in mindset and thinking, not about, that upfront order of, 10,000 units, 4,000 units, whatever it is that month. It's about knowing you'll get that, but we have to manufacture piece by piece, which a lot of the factories we work with don't mind because ultimately every piece is made by one person at a time anyway. So.
Yeah, and I feel like that's going to blend in well with some of the ideas around tech that you were mentioning earlier, that ML is helping you make these demand forecasts even smarter, and those can easily help with
machine learning, robotics in time. When a robot is at least cutting a garment, they're not going to be sewing them right now, but when they're cutting a garment, it's much easier for a factory to say, okay, if we're not hand cutting each piece, which currently everything is hand cut, then it's much easier for them to commit to it, just the sewing piece.
Makes sense. We have Jess Butler. How do you identify the brackets where an item is higher quality and potentially from a sustainable company when unfamiliar with brands and their ethics?
So, Jess, that is definitely a tricky one, and I think it requires a little bit of research. I think that a lot of brands that are sustainable or are mission driven, let's say, have their missions on their website, and it's very clear for everybody to see. Or if you're not going on the website, if you're going into a store, then the sales associate should be able to educate you, and that's really important that you get the education, you do the research, you spend a little bit of time. If you see a piece that you like, say, for example, something pops up on Instagram or Google Ads or whatever, when you search for something, that you actually go to the website and that you see if there are any values or missions that they talk about, because that's probably going to inform you. If there aren't, you have to kind of ask, why aren't they telling that story? I mean, for example, on our website, it's right up there. It's all about what we talk about in terms of sustainability, female empowerment. So if those things are missing, you maybe want to do a little research and see if they exist at all in the business.
Absolutely. We have another one from Surbhi Verma. What inspired you to enter the sustainable fashion industry?
To be totally honest, I was already in the fashion industry, and I felt really burnt out by, designing 4 collections a year, working with major retailers who were constantly marking my product down. It was always on promotion. It was always on sale. Now our product very, very, very rarely goes on sale because it's a seasonless product. I was feeling emotional burnout. I was feeling professional burnout. And I thought, in order for something that I felt so passionate about, which is the fashion industry and, dressing women every day, because I think that there's something deeply empowering about putting on a great item of clothing. And that was what I said to one of the earlier questions, that it's really important that even if you're working from home, you get dressed in the morning, because there's something that makes you feel good when you actually get out of bed, shower, you get dressed, and you kind of start your day. And I needed to rethink how I was going to be able to contribute to something that I loved still, which was fashion, but in a way that made sense to me and aligned with my values. And it wasn't that I was just, following what was already dictated in the industry. I needed to carve out my own path.
I love it. Thanks. We have Katie Lehman. How do you educate the average consumer to make sustainable choices?
So that's actually, it's much harder than you would think. I mean, of course, as I said, we have all of our mission and values on our website. It's, clear and simple for people to see. If you follow us on our social media platforms, we talk about the fact that we're a sustainable fashion brand, and we talk about some of the things that we do. Social media often doesn't give you the best platform for that, because people want to see a pretty picture. So, we always drive people back to the website where there is much more information. Our store, obviously our sales associates are 100% well-versed in everything that we do, as well as our customer service team. So everybody that's on our team and every piece of information we put out there, we try to tell people. And I think, for example, last week we did a whole campaign over our email and to our email subscribers, and also to Instagram, talking about just some of the stats that happen. And each month we pick a different charity that we work with, and we give 10% of a week's sales to the charity. So last month for July, it was Black Girl Ventures, which helps to fund Black and Brown girls startups. And this month it's Project Zero. We're talking about sustainability. So Project Zero is committed to, really help to sustain the oceans. And, we're just trying, through our philanthropic endeavors, through information you can find on the websites, through our sales associates, through our customer service team, to educate people in any way that we can, whether that's through stats or, if people reach out, we'll try to help them and tell our story in any way possible and how we're trying to do things better. Yeah,
I love it, especially like we're seeing the same in food and beverage companies, where someone's planting a tree, and with Stacey's project, they're helping with women empowerment. So this theme resonating in the industry is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really important. It's a common thread.
We have Arthur coming up next. Hi, how do you see the advancement of genderless fashion as in the way it's marketed, and the trend you mentioned about downsizing the amount of collections launched every year?
I actually really think that genderless fashion is something that we'll see more and more of. And I think that this goes back to the idea of investing in pieces that you really love. When I think about something that I might purchase, I buy most of my husband's clothing. He doesn't like to shop, so I do it for him. And a lot of the things that I buy for him are things that I've even looked at for myself. And, you know, he's very different physique to me. He's very, very tall, and he's very broad. But I actually sometimes will buy him things because I've been looking at that brand. So I think that that idea of it being genderless, being fluid, something that I could wear in a smaller size potentially, goes back to that idea of sustainable pieces. It's those building blocks in your wardrobe, whether that is a gorgeous white shirt. I mean, our husband's shirt was built off of the idea of a woman wearing a man's shirt. So, and how sexy that looks. And that's one of our best-selling pieces, this kind of oversized idea of a shirt. You know, a great cashmere sweater, which I say that is one of the things that every person needs in their sweater. That's whether you're a man or a woman. So I think that this kind of idea of fluidity across fashion is really important. And it goes back to the idea of a lack of seasonality. It's just having those pieces that you need and you layer on top of each other.
Very cool. We have Lana, who's next. Regarding near sourcing, I often run into plants not accepting lower quantities upfront. How do we change their mindset, or how have you changed some of your partners' mindsets?
So Lana, that is a big challenge. Not going to lie, that's a huge challenge. And when I first started On Demand, it took me a year to actually implement the whole system because for every partner that I work with now, I've had 10 that have said no. So it's really, number one, it's knocking on a lot of doors. Number two, the way that we really circumnavigated it, and we have an incredible, our partner in Shenzhen and Hong Kong is the same partner. It's a very forward-thinking lady who owns the factories. And then our Peruvian partner is a separate partner. But I think that ultimately it's very much about having someone who gets the fact that you're not saying you're making one piece. You're saying that each month you're going to make 100, 200, 1,000, 4,000 pieces. And that is kind of the order projection piece of it. So you can't, you know, it's hard. People, if you're only going to make actually one piece a month, that really is a sample. So I think that you have to know up front, you have to do a little bit of business planning, a little bit of projecting and saying, look, I'm not saying that I'm going to make one piece. I'm saying that I'm going to make 300 pieces this month. I just want them made piece by piece because I don't know what the sizes are going to be. So you have to cut them separately and you have to sew them separately. So I think it's kind of sitting down and taking this person into account as a partner. And that has been where we have been most successful, is speaking to people as though they really are partners, which they are partners of ours. You know, we're only successful in this whole endeavor if they are successful with us. And I believe that this is the future of manufacturing. I believe that this is the future of the fashion industry. And ultimately, it's about finding partners who you can speak to in that way and that believe in the vision that you have as well. We're thinking about launching denim towards the end of next year. And, you know, right now we're interviewing a bunch of factories about, you know, doing it in a sustainable way, because a lot of people know that the dye process is so intensive, or, you know, the way that jeans are washed is so incredibly intensive environmentally. So we're only speaking with people who will do this in a way that is not intensive and actually maybe doesn't use water, doesn't use chemicals in the dye process. So, and then on top of that to say, oh, and we want to do it piece by piece, it's challenging. But ultimately, I think that if you are going to pioneer something, you have to be a bit of a warrior about it, and you have to convince people on your vision and your dream.
Yeah, and until then, don't settle. That's a cool message.
Yeah, that's it.
We have Katie again. I noticed that the models on your website all appear to be straight-sized. Have you thought about including models that are a variety of sizes to reflect the real world?
100%. So we're actually launching plus size in Q1 of 2021. It was meant to be launched in Q4 of this year, but got backed up because of COVID. So we're launching it Q1 of next year, and I'm really excited about it. We did an incredible partnership with the Duchess of Sussex last year, September of last year. And that went all the way up to plus size. And after seeing the success of that, we're actually now going to go ahead and launch plus size. And I'm really excited about that. And of course, that will be shot on all size inclusive models.
Thank you. We have Nimril with a question. When do you think mainstream brands will move to a more sustainable business model? And how challenging would it be to make that move now?
Nimril, it depends a little bit who you mean exactly when you mean mainstream brands. If you mean high street brands, it's kind of one answer. And if you mean luxury brands like Ralph Lauren or Tory Burch or something like that, it's a slightly different model. I think that the luxury brands could actually move to it much faster because their price point already slightly allows for that. When you talk about something mainstream, like maybe a high street brand like a H&M, a Zara, Mango, any of those kind of brands, it may take a longer time, but that is why I said earlier in the talk that they may think about moving to just in time before they move to on demand. I think just in time would make more sense because their order volume, based on how many stores they have globally, just in terms of size and scale of business, means that they would be able to produce, say, 4,000 units a week, rather than doing 16,000 units all up front for that 1 month. So I think that ultimately it's about rethinking the way that people source factories, divide up orders, and then deploy product. So I think that machine learning is going to be critical in how fast these things happen. And as I said, that's the piece that we're working on now for ourselves, which we would then love to deploy to other people as well.
We have the next question from Aruna. The fashion industry contributes to 20% of water waste and 10% of carbon emissions globally. Curious to know and to raise awareness the different levels of waste, example, plastic dyes, burning stocks.
So I actually don't know the number. I wouldn't want to give you a false number about how much of plastics. Dyes is an extraordinary amount. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of the documentaries on fashion and their impact when it comes to particular parts of Bangladesh, India, places where if you see the incredibly polluting factor of dyes in some of the garments that are made in the fashion industry, it is really shocking. It is very frightening, and it's deeply saddening. They've even been known, some of the dyes have even been known to contain chemicals that have caused birth defects. It's horrifying, honestly. And as a new mother, it's something that I think is absolutely appalling and needs to be stopped immediately. Banning stock is something that really upsets me too, because you will see luxury brands, and there have been several that have come out in the press recently. Burberry was one that came out most recently, that rather than damage brand and sell an item off price, they burn the stock. And when you're thinking about burning that stock, it's burning silks, it's burning cashmere, it's burning leathers. And so you have to think about not only the labor that has gone into producing something being completely wasted, but also that raw material. There are other luxury brands that, make things that are made out of crocodile skins and things like that, which, I don't personally agree with, and then they're burning those items rather than putting them on sale. If you were to move to an on-demand model where, say it's a very expensive brand and they take orders for something. So, okay, if you happen to want that crocodile handbag or that crocodile pair of boots, which that's your own choice, it's up to you. Can you wait 2 weeks for it? For, the skins to actually be dyed and then made in your size, especially for you, rather than them upfront making a whole size run of alligator boots and, 1, 2, 3 pairs being made and 10 others being burnt at the end of the season. That is, I think that, this idea of delayed gratification in fashion is something that we maybe need to talk about and embrace. And I think for us, our customer has no problem waiting 10 to 14 days for a white shirt or a pair of sweatpants or, a cashmere sweater. That's not a problem for them. They're perfectly happy because ultimately it's an essential item in their wardrobe, and they understand the process that is allowing for that delay. I don't know. I think that once the consumer is happy to not walk into a store and immediately walk out with something, but have that shipped to them 2 weeks later, I think a whole host of opportunities is going to become available to fashion brands. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I love hearing that word, delayed gratification. Very counterintuitive and sounds futuristic. We want to see more of that.
Yeah.
And we have one last question coming up from Stephanie. How has the fashion industry reacted to your new model?
To tell you the truth, Stephanie, people within the fashion industry have been interested, but have been quite skeptical of it. I think a lot of people are afraid of change. The people that have been most receptive have been our customers. You realize how much people want to see this shift and how people genuinely have a burning desire for there to be an aspect and an element of change that is contributing to good in the world. And I think that is the thing that I find most exciting. And I think that once the customer becomes more and more and more aware and they start to demand that of fashion brands, that people will start to change. But I think that the people who have been least receptive up until this point, they're interested, but I think that they're afraid to take that change. And it was very challenging, to be honest, to make the change. But now that we've done it, I know that there's nowhere I would ever go back. And we forge our future based on pioneering and being as innovative as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Misha. This was wonderful. And thank you again for chatting with us. Thanks, audience. You've been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really great to chat to you. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. They were very thoughtful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika.
Absolutely.